I tried to get into UX design for over a year, and in that time I learned a lot about the UX design industry. And while I'm not employed as a UX designer at the moment, I think I can still share some unique insight as someone who spent over a year trying to break into this industry. So if you're someone who is potentially thinking about making a career transition into UX design, I think this video is going to be really helpful for you. I'll be honest, at times the 10 things that I'm going to be listing out in this video are going to sound somewhat negative, and I don't necessarily mean them to sound negative. In fact, I'm quite positive about this industry as a whole. But I also want to be realistic about it, because I think a lot of people will portray the UX design in a very glowy light, saying that it's all sunshine and rainbows and easy to get into, especially boot camps will portray that. And so I want to sort of give a more realistic look, at least for what I have experienced. And so let's dive into the 10 things I've learned trying to break into the UX design industry for a year. Number 1, it takes longer than you think to get into this industry. Despite what other videos may say, where people have said they've gotten into this industry in 3-4 months, I don't think that's the norm. I think for the vast majority of people, it's gonna take longer than that. It's gonna take, I would say, 6 to 12 months of hard work, maybe even a little bit longer. I know for me, it's taken me over a year. But a lot of people also probably work harder than me. And so if that's the case, then you may be able to get into this industry faster than I am. But I still think for the vast majority, 6 to 12 months is probably going to be the minimum requirement to be able to get into this industry. Number 2, the skills are easy to learn but hard to master. So when you start learning UX design, you start to realize, oh, Figma, which is one of the main softwares people use, is not that hard to learn. It's pretty easy once you watch a few tutorials about it. And so there can be a false sense of confidence that can arise when you're first learning UX design, but be aware that just because you know how to use Figma doesn't make you a good UX designer, because you have to be able to know how to create compelling designs, how to create usable designs. And that is something that requires a lot of time and a lot of practice to get good at. Number 3, you must take action in order to get good at UX UI design. So this isn't something where you can just read a few books, take a course, and just passively soak in information to get good at this. This is something where you actually have to sit down at your computer and work on projects, work on doing research, work on doing actual UI work, work on prototyping, and putting in those reps in order to actually get good at the skills required to do UX UI design. Number 4, UX UI design involves much more than just designing beautiful interfaces. If you think that you're just going to be sitting behind your computer and doing Figma work, it's not the case at all. So there's a lot of communication involved when it comes to UX UI design, and I think that it is probably one of the more, if not the most important skill to have, since you're going to be doing so much of it. So you're going to be, depending on what kind of role you have, you might be doing user research where you're actually conducting interviews of people. You have to be able to effectively collaborate with whatever design team that you're on. You need to be able to effectively articulate your design decisions to stakeholders and people who don't necessarily have a design vocabulary. You have to be able to break it down for them. And so there's a lot more involved with UX UI design than just doing the Figma work and designing the UI interfaces. Number 5, UX UI design is not always creative. A lot of people go into UX UI design thinking that it's basically like a graphic designer that makes more money, but a lot of times that's not the case. So if you go into a company and they already have a very elaborate design system, meaning that all of their color palettes are already predefined, their button styles are predefined, their typography is already predefined, then that doesn't give you a lot of creative freedom to be, well, creative, right? So you're basically picking those elements from a design system and then creating a product interface from that. So in that essence, it's not a super creative position to be in. But sometimes the creativity can really just be from solving the problems themselves, because oftentimes you will run into a scenario where you need to solve a business problem and there's not a clear solution to be able to do that. And so in that scenario, you do have to exercise some creative and critical thinking. But as far as the actual design work, it's sometimes not always creative. Number 6, a UX bootcamp is not enough to get you a job. I sort of had this false mentality that when I took my bootcamp, when I was done with it, I was going to be able to land a job and it was just going to be easy. And that is not the case. So for some people, they might be able to get a job after they do a UX bootcamp. But I think for the way I see things now, I see UX bootcamps as basically a way to consolidate a lot of information about the industry and apply it in the scope of doing a conceptual project. And so with that being said, you learn a lot of different skills that a UX UI designer will do, but you don't get good at any one of those skills. You just sort of get this bird's eye view about it. And so really what I think is that if you want to do a UX bootcamp, do it with the intent of figuring out what your weaknesses are, because then from there you can figure out what your weaknesses are and then take the proper steps to turn those weaknesses into strengths. So for me, one of the things that I had difficulty with was the actual UI design component, making good designs. And that's just something that takes a lot of practice. So when I was done with my bootcamp, I took courses and just worked on recreating screens, popular product screens, so that I could get a better sense of what good design actually is. Number 7, the UX design industry is very competitive when it comes to trying to find a job. If you look at job postings on certain sites, they'll often tell you how many applicants have applied to those jobs, and I've seen some that are over 200. I have seen some that have said over 2,000 people have applied to a certain job. And so with that being said, you really have to figure out a way to stand out in this industry, and you definitely can't take a passive approach when it comes to landing a job within the UX UI design field. Number 8, there are not as many remote opportunities as there once was. So a lot of people want to get into this field, and I certainly wanted to get into this field because it was a way for me to get into tech, get a remote job without learning to code. That was sort of my mantra for wanting to get into this whole field. But the problem is that a lot of companies are going back to in-office, or at the very minimum, they're going back to a hybrid setting. So the dream of doing remote work is certainly still viable, and there's still quite a few companies that do have remote opportunities. But I have found with doing a lot of job hunting that I would say half, if not more than half, of the opportunities that I see are either completely in office or hybrid. So just keep that in mind. The remote opportunities are not as plentiful as maybe they once were a year or two ago. Number 9, freelance opportunities within UX design are not really super feasible in my opinion. Now this isn't going to apply for people that want to just work within a company, but for me, my goal was to always do freelance. And becoming a freelance UX UI designer, I find is not really viable, because the people that want UX UI design are typically well-established startups that understand the value of UX UI design. If you just are looking at local mom and pop shops in your town to see if they want UX UI design, they're not going to see the value in that, because they probably don't even know what the hell it is. And so I find that when it comes for freelance opportunities within UX UI design, it really sort of pivots you into web design. And truthfully, that's more what I'm working on now. But just know, if you want to exercise the whole UX UI design process, there are sort of limited opportunities to do that in a freelance basis, and you'll likely have to become an employee somewhere if you want to sort of utilize the entire spectrum of UX UI design skills. Number 10, this is going to sound a little woo-woo, but I also think it's important. I think a lot of people try to get into this field, including myself, because we are looking for a sense of happiness. Maybe we are unhappy with the current situation that we're in and a job that we don't like, and we think that by pivoting into this tech field, it is going to make us happy. Well, I can tell you, as someone that has spent over a year trying to get into this industry, it is not something that makes me happy. And it's not to say I'm unhappy, but what I've realized is that happiness is not defined by whatever situation you're in. It is defined by your willingness to accept the situation that you're in and be grateful for the position that you're in. Now, you can still have goals to get into this industry, but I think if your only goal for getting into this industry is so that you can be happy, I think that that is going to fail you miserably. You need to have some inherent, you need to like the work of UX UI design to some degree if you are actually going to flourish within this industry. And I think a lot of people have sort of superficial reasons for wanting to get into different tech fields, but I think there needs to be a stronger underlying component than just to feel a sense of happiness or just to be able to get into tech. And so that's something, again, a little woo-woo, but I do want to make you aware that transitioning into this field is not something that is going to make you inherently happier. Happiness is really a choice, and it is really up to you to decide whether or not you are happy with your current situation. You can balance being happy with your current situation, but still having goal aspirations for achieving whatever goals that you have in life. So these are the 10 things I've learned trying to get into the UX industry for over a year. And I think maybe some of you watching this might be thinking, well, Jansley, do you regret it? I mean, you've spent over a year doing this. Like, are you still into this at all? And it's a valid question. And the short answer is I have no regrets with trying to get into this industry. I've learned a lot about not only the industry, but about myself and the things that I actually want out of life by doing this whole career transition. And so for me, I've basically learned that, hey, I don't really want to work for someone. I want to do my own thing and do freelance. And so that's why I am sort of pivoting more into web design and learning Webflow, which is basically like a no-code web development app. And so I'm getting more into that. But I would have never gotten into that unless I went through my process of going through the UX bootcamp and working on projects and applying for jobs. This has been a very a very iterative process for me of figuring out and honing what it is that I actually want to do when it comes to a career. And so even if you aren't dead set on doing UX, I think if you have the right values for why you want to get into UX, I think it's worth trying to get into, because even if you don't end up taking a role that you envisioned initially, you might pivot into something that you find you really enjoy, but you won't know that unless you start your journey. And that's really the main thing, is like whatever you're interested in, just start. Because it is so easy to get wrapped up in trying to figure out what the best course is, what's the best path, what field do I want to get into, when really you would learn so much more if you just dived in and tried it, and just go through the journey and just make the adjustments as necessary. When you find out things that you like, things that you don't like, you can sort of hone what you are interested in, and then you sort of just carve your own path along the way. And to me, that has been a very liberating thing to do. And that is something that actually brings me happiness, is having that agency with carving my own path. And so I just sort of want to cap the video off with that, and that if you are interested in UX UI design and you're not just interested in it just so you can be in tech or to make some money, I think if you have some underlying values that are stronger than just those superficial ones for why you want to get into this, then I say go for it, because you can always pivot into something later on, and you'll probably learn something about yourself in the process. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, definitely hit the subscribe button. It would help me out a lot and just lets me know if these videos are resonating with you. And until next time, I will see you in the next video. Take care.